I don't think that being far away matters much morally. I don't see why it would. No?
Can you explain moral relativism and two other doctrines that are
Yeah,
sometimes...
so moral relativism is the view that there is moral truth, but that it's relative to something or other. It could be relative to a culture, so every culture's values are correct within the context of that culture. Or it could be relative to a time. You know, there's a certain moral truth nowadays that's not the same as the moral truth in the old days. Or it could be relative to individuals. Your moral truth is different from my moral truth. Okay, there are lots of different ways to do it. But they all relativize, they all think that there's a moral truth, but it's relativized to something. Some group or other, even if it's a group of one. Okay? The other two doctrines that are confused with it are, I mean, it's true that people have had different moral beliefs over time and different moral beliefs across cultures and from one individual to another. There are people in this room who are pro-abortion choice and there are people in this room who are anti-abortion, presumably. There's a moral difference. It doesn't prove that they're both right. But it's both right and wrong. You know, it's right for some people and wrong for others. So the fact that moral views differ from place to place, just like, think about, anyway, the fact that they differ doesn't show that moral relativism is true. Any more than the fact that people differ in their beliefs. You know, some people think the atomic number of oxygen is 8. Some people think the atomic number of oxygen is 12. There's a difference of opinion. It doesn't have two atomic numbers. It's because people have different beliefs about it. The world doesn't have two shapes, round and flat, depending on who believes it. It's not like it gets flat in places where people think it's flat and it's round in other places. And then the third one is toleration, the idea that it's wrong to impose your values on others. And that doesn't support relativism, obviously, but it also doesn't follow from relativism. It couldn't, because if moral relativism is true, then whether we should impose our values depends on what our group, culture, time, whatever, says about that. Maybe I belong to a group that says, go ahead and impose your values. Well, the relativist is going to have to tell us what to do when we go somewhere else. We're supposed to follow our own values or the local values. Usually they'll say the local values. But that leads to real weird paradoxes like, you know, we can shoot off a missile aimed at the Nazis because we're pushing the button here. But once it gets over Nazi airspace, it's wrong for it to land. You know, so we ought to blow it up in midair. Something like that. That's bizarre. Don't ask me, ask the moral relativist what to say about that.
So are you saying moral relativism doesn't really make sense?
I don't think it makes a lot of sense. I give a bunch of arguments against it. I found it to be very implausible. And I think that a lot of what you get, you know, what it appeals to people about it, we can get from other doctrines that we certainly should believe are true. Like, it's certainly true that it's often stupid to impose our values on others, because it doesn't work, or because we haven't really fully understood what their values are before we go around trying to change them, or how they fit into a culture in general, right? Or because force has costs, as we discussed, right? Those are good reasons not to impose our values too much, but that doesn't mean that moral relativism is true. Likewise, there's moral diversity. There's diversity of moral opinions. But we can believe that without believing that everybody, or every group, or every individual is right in their moral opinions. In fact, when you say that, it seems like all you're really trying to say, there's this, sometimes the relativist sounds like they're just restating something in these kind of contentious words. They're argumentative words. So if you want to say, if you believe that, it's true for you. Remember we talked about that on the first day. And all that really means is you believe it. So why don't you say you believe it instead of giving it this nice phrase, and it's true. But truth doesn't mean anything on the mouth of somebody who talks about truth like that. True for you. If somebody believes in what's true for you, they don't really believe in truth, right? Or else they're using the word in more than one different sense. Relativism is open to attack from both sides, right? The realist can say, you believe in moral facts. Why not think some people are getting them wrong? The whole problem with moral realism is how could there be moral facts? And the anti-realist can say, you obviously don't think that there's a single moral truth. Why call these true at all? Right? So it's a very unstable doctrine.
So you will...
Or anti-realist?
Yeah.
It's easier to say anti-realist. That's why I sometimes say it.
An anti-realist believes that everything's in black and white and there are answers.
Anti-realist believes that there are no moral truths. None.
So
every moral belief. Think about how an anti-realist is like an atheist, bless you, is about God. Okay? So The theist believes there's God, the atheist thinks there's no God. The moral realist thinks there's a moral truth, the anti-realist thinks there's no moral truth. So the realist thinks that it's really wrong to do some stuff and really okay to do other stuff. The anti-realist thinks nothing's really wrong or okay.
What was the second one, that there's toleration of the other one?
The moral diversity, the fact that there are differences of moral belief across time and across culture and from one individual to another.
Can you just explain again why moral relativism is a fallacy in either the doctrines, and why the doctrines don't follow moral relativism?
Yeah, so take the doctrine of moral diversity. You find that there are these differences of belief about morality. That doesn't mean that the moral truth, that there's a moral truth, but it's relative to these different beliefs. After all, people have different beliefs about biology, but that doesn't mean there's no truth to biology. Right? Some people think the theory of evolution is by and large correct. Other people think that it can't be correct. Okay? That doesn't mean that it is correct, and it's also incorrect, depending on who's believing it. Right? So moral relativism doesn't follow from the doctrine of moral diversity. The doctrine of moral diversity we know to be true to some degree, right, because there are differences. We found them. Herodotus found some, Ruth Benedict found some, right? Mary Midgley found some, and anthropologists found tons. The doctrine of toleration doesn't follow from relativism. In fact, it's in a way inconsistent with relativism. Because if there's no non-relative moral truth, then it can't be morally true in some non-relative way that we ought not to impose our values. Whether we should or not is relative to what our culture or our own moral code says, depending on which form of relativism you're taking. Suppose I take the version of moral relativism according to which my culture's values are correct. Everybody's culture's values are correct. And if my culture says to not impose my values, then I shouldn't do it. If my culture says to go ahead and impose, then I should do it. Depends on what my culture says, on that view. Crazy view. Yes, there are real and good philosophers who are moral relativists. I'm making fun of it a little bit. But you have to simplify an intro. There are versions of it that are less crazy sounding than the ones that were, that have gotten the most play, really. Yep, Kevin?
Can you go over imposing values on others?
Sorry?
The imposing values on others.
Yeah, so about whether it's plausible or not, or whether it follows.
Wrong to,
what's right or wrong about it?
Yeah.
Yeah. So what I tried to say about that was, I'm just offering moral opinions here, but I think they're ones that people would share. It's true, I think, that there are serious costs to imposing your values on others, depending on how you're imposing them. If you're imposing them by force doesn't always work. Sometimes it's counterproductive. Sometimes it leads to collateral damage or unintended side effects, right? Lots of reasons not to impose our values through force. But that doesn't mean we never should. Sometimes there's an evil that's so great that we ought to do that. We ought to impose. Like Hitler, for example, or maybe the slaughter and, state-sponsored rape in Bosnia. So, same thing with judgments. Maybe it's impolite to pass judgment on other people, and if you do it too often, people will think you're an asshole. So you shouldn't do it too often. That doesn't mean that none of those judgments is ever true. It might be true.
Can you explain, there's another part to it about moral anti-realism and moral relativists imposing values. Some people are very, especially the moral anti-realist.
So the anti-realist, it also doesn't follow from anti-realism.
Wait, what is the question?
She's asking about anti-realism and imposing values. So it can't follow from anti-realism that you shouldn't impose values either. Anti-realism says there's no moral truth. Well, it's not that. It's that it can't be wrong. It can't really be wrong to impose your values if nothing's really wrong. It's not okay either. Right? You can't follow. So you might have values, whether they're moral truths or not. The anti-realist can believe that people have values. It's just that it can't really be wrong to impose them if nothing's really wrong. And it can't really be okay to. Nothing's really okay. My question or not? So the relativist says that morality is relative, moral truth. There is moral truth, but it's relative to something. take the view according to which moral truth is relative to culture. Then is it okay to impose your values? Only if your culture says it's okay to impose your values. Make sense? You can't be non-relatively wrong to impose your values because relativism is true. That's what Bernard Williams refers to. He's talking about something he calls subjectivism, but that's what he refers to as the mid-air position. Like somehow, because relativism is true, it's non-relatively true that there's this non-relative moral truth that we shouldn't impose our values. If relativism is true, there are no non-relative moral truths. What else?
What do you mean by refined ones?
So when I gave these doctrines, I said a few things to qualify them, to help make them, bring them to life and make them more plausible. For example, moral realism is the view that there are moral facts, but it's not necessarily the view that we know those facts. That's a separate question. It's not the view that those facts are simple. It might be complicated. So it might be that abortion is okay sometimes, but not other times. Right? It's not the view that that the same moral truths don't have different implications for different circumstances. Right? So I gave the example of giving somebody food with your left hand. In some parts of the world that's wrong. Around here it's not wrong. Oh no, specter of moral relativism. No. The same moral truth that it's wrong to offend people for no reason tells you not to give people food with their left hand if you're in South India, but it's okay to do it around here. So that's a qualification. It says that moral realism isn't committed to the moral truth being simple in that particular way. And then moral realism isn't the view that morality is strict. Some people will say, well, the realist thinks that abortion is wrong, and the anti-realist thinks it's okay. Well, that gets two things wrong. The realist could think it's really wrong or really okay. Or really okay sometimes and not others. And the anti-realist can't think it's okay. They can be for it or against it. They can be for allowing people to choose whether to do it or not, or against it. They can't think it's okay. And I did the same thing when I talked about moral anti-realism. I said, for example, that the anti-realist can have moral values. Things can matter to you, even if they don't matter, period. And I think we can reason about them and take those values seriously. Is there anything wrong with imposing your values on others by, say, putting murderers in jail? Not really wrong if anti-realism is true. Are you for it or against it? Well, if you're sane, you're probably for it. That's what I mean by the qualifiers. Those little things I said to sort of help bring the doctrines into more focus. What else?
Is this being recorded?
I am.
Yeah.
Well, if you said this already, then don't worry about it. I'll try and find it on the recording. But did you specify what exactly is right and wrong about the doctrines? I know you
About which doctrines? About the relativism ones?
Yeah.
So I talked about, these are the ones, I have talked about it a little bit. I talked about this business about imposing your values on others. That often it's stupid to impose your values on others because you don't really understand other cultures, or because you're not thinking about the bad consequences that could come from failure, like when we went into Iraq and all that. Right? That was a mistake, probably, because we didn't have a good exit strategy and we didn't realize how much harm would be done by our invasion. I mean, a lot of us did, and thought that the congressional rule was giving the keys to the drunk driver when Congress said that George W. Bush could declare war on Iraq if he wanted to. To me, that was like giving the keys to the drunk driver, and I was saying so at the time. It's crazy. The